So hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Todd Durham from the Foundation Fighting Blindness and Unirare Registry for a conversation about patient registries, natural history studies, inherited retinal disease research, and really what these efforts mean for the future of adult Refsum community. So many of you have heard us talk about initiatives such as the Adult Refsum Disease Registry, our new multinational natural history study, and the importance of building the research infrastructure that we need to support future therapeutic development. So today, we'll discuss why these efforts matter, how they fit together, and what lessons that the adult Refsum community can learn from other rare disease communities that have accelerated research and care. So Todd, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Diane.
Before we dive into registries and natural history studies, I'd love for our community to get to know you a little better. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your role at the Foundation Fighting Blindness and how you became involved in rare disease and inherited retinal disease research.
Yeah, sure. I'm the Senior Vice President of Clinical and Outcomes Research here at the Foundation Fighting Blindness. I was trained back in the 90s in biostatistics and then again in the 2000s in outcomes research and decision science. And I became very interested in how we develop medicines, and I did that for a long time on the industry side. And now at the Foundation Fighting Blindness, I'm responsible for leading our clinical research programs. I have two significant ones. One is called My Retina Tracker Registry, which is a participant or patient-focused registry where people can enroll themselves, and it's associated with a sponsored genetic testing program. But the other second clinical program is work that we do through the Foundation Fighting Blindness Clinical Consortium, which is really a cooperative effort of investigators and reading centers around the world, particularly focused on inherited retinal disease.
So Todd, I know you've had the opportunity to work across many different inherited retinal disease communities. So looking back over the last decade, what changes do you see in retinal disease research that have been the most exciting or most encouraging to you?
I think progress that we've seen here is just the diversity of therapeutic approaches. So in the world of inherited retinal disease, things like neuroprotection through the trials like NAC and NACA, but also some of the optogenetic therapies are very exciting where you can convey some light sensitivity to some other retinal cells after the photoreceptors are largely gone and degenerated. Just the diversity of approaches in addition to those that we got so captivated with the marketing approval of Luxturna back in 2017, that was just scratching the surface for what was possible. And now we see many companies, many therapeutic approaches. And we're realistic about the challenges of new therapy development. Not all of these approaches will be successful, but we think many of them will. And it just does take time and patience, which is hard for members of the rare disease community to accept.
So you've mentioned, different rare disease communities. And I know you've seen many rare disease communities at different stages of development. What have you learned from those experiences that might be particularly relevant for the adult Refsum community today?
Yeah, I think there are many models. I think number one is sort of having an organization. The Foundation Fighting Blindness is a relatively large organization, and we touch many rare disease communities, but we have some very strong partnerships with other organizations that are much smaller, and they're often started by a family member. And they're really serving as the central focus point for that community around the world. So they take it upon themselves to organize. So having a central organizing group who's known around the world is very helpful. And we've been able to collaborate with other organizations like the Usher 1F Collaborative. And many organizations come to us and we partner in all kinds of ways, data sharing, just sharing advice, things like that. But I think having a strong representative voice to really help guide priorities for that specific community. None of us can do it all by ourselves. So we each have, a role to play.
Very true. I know one challenge that nearly every ultra rare disease is facing is really building enough awareness, like the engagement and also data to move the research forward. So that brings us to the question and the topic of patient registries. So many of our patients hear about registries, but may not fully understand their purpose. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the purpose of UniRare is and why it was created?
Yeah. UniRare is a large study that we're doing. It was intended to give us a sort of a platform or a template approach to studying inherited retinal disease. Uh, One of our first studies that we did through the Foundation Fighting Blindness Clinical Consortium is the RUSH-2A study, but that was just only people who had USH2A related retinal degeneration were eligible for that study. And we realized that a lot of the activities in doing a study are sort of repeated work that takes a lot of time and effort on parts of the centers that are participating in the study. And our investigators, realized maybe there's a more efficient approach, which is really to build a study that fit most circumstances. And so the UniRare study is that study, which is really a universal or a very general protocol. It's very comprehensive, though. We're doing many functional studies and imaging studies as part of this. And this study allows us to follow a large number of people. And the study has two components. One is like the preliminary part is just a single point in time to bring in with diverse conditions. And we just look at them at a single visit. We do a minimum number of assessments. And for that objective, we are enrolling 1,500 participants. And then that initial part of the study serves as the first visit of what can be a 4-year follow-up study. And we've been able to engage external funding and leverage that to follow individual specific cohorts over a longer period of time. So we not just see at one point in time, but how things progress over time, which is very useful for therapy developers. So the UniRare is really our learning from previous experiences is let's be very efficient. Let's try not to redo the parts that are most taxing and least interesting, let's say, and be able to accommodate a number of communities of interest. And so we've been very successful in attracting funding. And because the Foundation Fighting Blindness, sees itself as being an essential partner here, a large part of the costs have already been taken care of by the Foundation Fighting Blindness.
That's great. I know we get a lot of comments from patients wondering whether, filling out another registry is actually going to make a difference. Can you share some examples of how patient registries have helped advance research or therapy development for other rare diseases?
Yeah, so I know very well the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation has their own registry. It's probably the gold standard for registries, and it's been very useful for therapeutic development. And that now in that area, they have an approved therapy for the majority of patients in the CF population. That has been very effective. Here at the foundation, we have our one registry called My Retina Tracker Registry, which is separate from the UniRare study itself. But My Retina Tracker Registry has allowed us to identify over 30,000 people with inherited retinal disease. And those are now people who are known to their physicians and at sites who can now participate in clinical trials. It's also the relative frequency or prevalence of those conditions is now known because we can publish that information. So now therapy developers know how common some of these conditions are. So when you raise your hand to participate in research, you're really raising your hand to say we're here and we would like to see a therapy become available for us. And the UniRare study itself and other studies that we have been doing have really informed many companies who have active clinical trials today. So some of the things that we can learn from the study are who are good candidates for a trial. So in the world of inherited retinal disease, at some point, your retina loses so much anatomical structure that you're not a good candidate for certain types of therapeutic approaches. So want to know what's what's the time course of those changes, and at what point in a person's life with their retinal condition would they be a good candidate for a clinical trial? And another important thing we're learning is what measures exactly do we use to show that a new drug or treatment is working? And in some cases, we can't answer these questions in the absence of data. Yet it sort of leaves open that question to the therapy developers when they're developing their clinical trials, and it means there might be a little more trial and error on their part. And many companies who are developing rare disease treatments, they don't have the opportunity to do multiple trials again. They really need to answer a lot of these questions before they do that.
Is there any single type of information that's most valuable for patients to contribute? And how do researchers actually use the information that's acquired from the surveys?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are in the world of inherited retinal disease. There is, some interest in, is there a relationship between your specific type of genetic variant and your outcome, your, say, the rate of change of your disease progression, for example, might be an interesting question. But I think in our world, in our studies, we really are interested in how well a person's visual field tests are looking. So many of our studies are looking at retinitis pigmentosa. So as people lose sensitivity in their visual field, we'd like to know how quickly that happens, but also the structure of the retina. And I can think in one of our important studies, we would use the same protocols as a previous study, and what we learned in a new population, some of the patterns of the anatomical structure that we're seeing in this condition didn't look like the last one we studied. So there can be nuances from condition to condition and even from study to study. So I think all of these things, and our studies have tended to be very comprehensive, and they can take up to 2 days to finish all the assessments. And I know people who were participating in these studies, they do get fatigued by having to do so many assessments of their vision. So all of these are important. And I can think of companies are using this data now to determine how long they should follow people in clinical trials. They are using information from studies like these to determine exactly who should be eligible for clinical trial to give the treatment the best chance of showing that it's successful. And they're using it to convince regulators that there's an evidence base that these are important outcomes for patients.
Wonderful. Another question that we often field from patients, I think some patients are understandably concerned about privacy and how their information might be used. What would you want patients and families to know about participating in the registries?
Yeah, I think anyone who's conducting a registry has to be thinking first and foremost about privacy. Our internal study, My Retina Tracker Registry, we have data security rules, we have policies, we have audits. All the firms that we work with are concerned with privacy, securities, and firewalls and things like that. And when it comes to a study that we're doing through our network, like the UniRare study, a person's privacy is protected because they are going to a site, and only, say, a doctor who's treating them and conducting the study, only that site knows your identity. Your identity stays at that site, and you're known in the research from a coded number. So outside of that site, no one knows who you are at all. And obviously, in healthcare settings and in human research settings, privacy and security is one of the most important aspects of all human research.
For an adult Refsum patient listening today, what do you feel are the most important reasons to consider joining a patient registry?
I think number one, to advocate for options for yourself. Knowing that there is an activated patient community who has a voice and who would like to advocate for therapies. To say also, here's an active community that is willing to participate in clinical trials when they come around. We've heard that feedback from many companies with therapeutic trials is they want to know that there's an organized community there that they can energize and activate. If they can't enroll participants in clinical trials, they can't develop therapies. And I have heard many organizations say we really, for this condition, are struggling to find an organization who will help us champion the development of therapy. So to put your to join a registry is to raise your hand and say we want therapies to be available for us, and without it, it's sort of harder to encourage companies to develop therapies for that group. It's just a factor that the companies are really considering.
So we've talked a bit about the foundation that needs to be built before therapies can move forward. So I'd like to spend a few minutes looking ahead and talking about what the future could hold. So Todd, I know you've worked with many rare disease communities. In your perspective, what really separates communities that make rapid progress from those that struggle to gain momentum?
Mm. Wow. I think, yeah, I think it's important to have the champion, to have someone who's really passionate about the mission for the patient community, to have, I think, like a medical or scientific champion with you, if that's not already built into your organization, someone who can help you navigate clinical research and those steps along the way. And I think to get really educated and take every opportunity to learn about the regulatory process for how new medicines are developed, and also a sense for how business works. Can be very disappointing to see that promising new therapies don't survive business cycles where, some of the, difficult aspects of business, commercial opportunities, ability to make money. These can be very frustrating points along the line for rare disease communities, but to be aware of those factors that are going in. But I think those are the things that I think really make some of the rare disease patient organizations a little more successful navigating. We can't change the large systems that we work in, but it helps us navigate them a little more effectively without, spinning our wheels.
When you look at the adult Refsum community today, what opportunities do you see over the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, wow. I mean, I think the world of medicine and technology is just really amazingly diverse and complex. So I think I've spoken with many people in medicine who say medicine is getting to be so sophisticated that the approaches really require specialist knowledge and things like that. And so I think that's exciting, but I think if you're a member of a rare disease community, also very daunting because it means there are a lot of things to keep up with, all the advances. I think the availability of genetic tests and genetic screening is very exciting, becoming more mainstream and really probably a main way we think about medicine going forward. So I think that's one thing, and I think just the creative funding models for rare disease treatment research, I think is very exciting. And I think we're also starting to see that there are some interesting movement with policy changes in Washington, especially with the US FDA, recognizing some of the special challenges for developing medicines for rare disease. Some of the same approaches that have been used since the 50s, when a lot of our laws were written about regulation, were written thinking about very common diseases, very prevalent diseases. And those approaches are hard to translate to rare disease, where oftentimes we don't know very much about how those conditions evolve over time. We don't know the best way to measure whether a treatment has improved or not. So that to me is exciting also, that there's recognition that developing medicines for rare disease requires maybe a different set of rules, which is not to say we're going to accept products and therapies that don't work. It just means that the study designs, how we design the studies might be a little bit different than they have been, say, for some of the more prevalent conditions.
You could encourage every adult Refsum patient and family member to take just one action. But what action would that be in order to move the research forward?
I would say get involved in a registry, learn about your condition and what the research looks like for your condition. Go attend a conference where you can learn about what the major research questions are. Get more involved in the research agenda itself. Raise your hand to say what's important to you as a patient. Oftentimes, clinicians and other scientists, they don't really know, they have an idea about what might alter the course of a condition or a disease, but they don't often know what's most important to patients if they could have a treatment available. So even to discuss that with researchers, as someone in a rare disease community, just to identify here's what a good treatment would look like for me. That can really change the course of therapeutic development to really give companies something to aim for.
And finally, I'd like to end on a more personal note. For someone who may have recently been diagnosed with adult Refsum disease, or for a family member who may be feeling overwhelmed, what reasons are there to be hopeful today that maybe didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago?
Yeah. I think number one, it's understandable if a person is feeling overwhelmed. I've met many people in our communities who feel overwhelmed at that point in time, but I've also been encouraged and heartened to see in the time that I've known people that they now are on a different course. And I've seen many people say, this thing happened in my life, or when I decided to take this action, my life changed dramatically. So I think, when a person is feeling really overwhelmed with a new diagnosis, just to know that, like everything, there is a process and there are things will evolve and things do pass. And I think something to be excited about is research is active and ongoing. We still see significant research dollars being put into eye care and eye research. So that's a great sign. And one thing that we it's very hard to predict how this will work, but oftentimes when there's an advance in one condition, it leads to a clue about how to treat another condition. So that at least in our world, that we have a large number of clinical trials and clinical experiments. Certainly, some of those lessons will extend to adult Refsum to maybe jumpstart some advances in that field also.
Todd, I want to thank you for sharing your insights and your experiences with us today. We really appreciate your support of the adult Refsum community and your ongoing efforts to advance rare disease and inherited retinal disease research.
Thank you very much, Diane. It's great to see you today.